Welcome to yet another episode of my Tour of Kanto series, where we examine all aspects of an area of interest in the Kanto region. I look at the game leading up to that point as if it were your first time playing, what Pokemon can be found there, what some of the NPCs say, and how it's portrayed in future games, the anime and the manga. It's a pretty good time, and for this next stop, I decided to take things way back to the beginning of the game, so strap in because this ended up being way longer than I anticipated. I guess I had a lot to say. The year is 1998. You're in middle school and it's the holiday season in North America. A loving family member sent you some cash and a Christmas card, and now you're headed to Hills with your family to get a new video game to play. You stroll right on by the clothing department because nobody has time for that right now. Then you feel the beckoning call of where you're supposed to be, the electronics department. Sure, the obvious choice is to get the brand new Nintendo 64 game of The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which, unbeknownst to you, will become one of the greatest video games ever. But times are tough for Uncle Ray this year, and he was only able to send you $40. Instead, your eyes are drawn to some colorful Game Boy boxes. One is bright red and one is bright blue, and they have the same name, Pokemon. What's all this then? The boxes feature a giant orange dragon with fire on its tail and a giant blue turtle with cannons in its shell. It tells you that you gotta catch them all, and a challenge like that is difficult to resist. So you make your purchase, you thank Uncle Ray, but in your mind because you don't really speak to him, waltz right on by that clothing department and head home to begin your journey. So after meeting a kindly old gent who calls himself Professor Oak, you get to choose your first Pokemon as you learn the ways of how the game works. You get your pick of Bulbasaur, the seed Pokemon, Charmander, the lizard Pokemon, or Squirtle, the tiny turtle Pokemon, along with Oak's grandson who is making the same decision. You head on up to the town to the north, Viridian City, for an errand that Professor Oak made you do. You bring this parcel back to him, passing wild birds and rats along the way, known as Pidgey and Rattata. Acquire the Pokedex to help keep track of all of these creatures you'll be coming across, and then the only way to go from here is back on up to Viridian City, the eternally green paradise. One person there asked if you want to know about the two kinds of caterpillar Pokemon. Well, you haven't seen those yet, so sure. Caterpie has no poison, but Weedle does. Watch out for its poison sting. Oof, sounds scary. Other folks around town basically act as tutorials for learning the ins and outs of the game though. If you glance at the blackboard in one of the buildings, you get to learn about the different status conditions, one being poison. When poisoned, a Pokemon's health steadily drops. Poison lingers after battles. Use antidote to cure poison. Well, you just got that warning about Weedle's poison sting, so I bet that thing means business if they're choosing to write this down on a blackboard like they're John Krasinski in A Quiet Place. But you can most certainly purchase some antidotes at a Pokemart if need be. If you happen to explore the city before bringing that parcel back to Oak, there's one dude just laying on the ground and blocking your path to continue on. Is he drunk? Oh, no, he just hasn't had his coffee yet. Yeah, I buy it. But after bringing the parcel back, this bro has had his coffee, and now he wants to teach you how to catch a Pokemon. And what Pokemon does he come across? Oh my god, it's a Weedle! Watch out for its poison sting, my guy! Oh, he just catches it easily within seconds. But what this little interaction does do, along with showing how to catch Pokemon, is show you what a Weedle looks like. The other area of interest in Viridian City is the gym, but this gym is apparently always closed. Nothing to worry about now. Now you could take the path to the west, which is Route 22, but it will ultimately lead to a dead end for the time being. It is here where you can catch a couple new Pokemon of Spearow or Nidoran though, and the latter has two different genders. You can also get into a Pokemon battle with Oak's grandson here for the second time as well. But really the only way you can go to progress your game is to the north of Viridian City to Route 2. There isn't much to Route 2, at least for now. There's a small patch of grass with more wild Pokemon and a couple trees that look different, but you can't get through them. But the findings in this patch of grass will vary depending on if you're playing the red or blue version. Both versions have the same Pidgey and Rattata from Route 1, but also Weedle in the red version or Caterpie in the blue version, the very same caterpillar Pokemon you were just informed about. Continuing on, someone asks you a question signifying what you're about to encounter. Are you going to Viridian Forest? Be careful, it's a natural maze. So at this point, there have now been 2 warnings issued to you about the next place to explore: Weedle's poison sting and to not get lost in a maze of a forest. So once you feel you are ready, you step into these woods. Viridian Forest. Now the first thing to know is the change in music. It has a steady metronome beat to it of 4 notes repeating each other at the start. I don't know much about music theory, so I'm not going to pretend to explain this Game Boy music, but there's just something about it that really sets the tone for wandering through a forest maze. It steadily repeats itself a lot, just like all of the same trees you would be walking through. Just to slightly jump ahead a bit, but I feel like the Viridian Forest theme is right up there with Lavender Town as the most memorable themes from Red and Blue. It's pretty awesome for the vibe that it's giving off. But yeah, like that person said, this place is indeed a maze. Is it a difficult maze? Certainly not. You can really only go the wrong way 1, maybe 2 times, and the rest follows a pretty linear path. But even if you do choose to go to the left at the entrance first, there are some items to pick up and it loops back to the entrance pretty quick. But because of this being a maze, I would say it acts as the first real dungeon-like area of this RPG. By this point, you've only seen 2 very small towns and 3 outdoor routes with a set path to follow. But with the subtle warnings and a maze-like forest to trek through, it's your first navigational challenge of the game. I think it really works for what it's going for too. You don't want it to be too difficult right at the beginning. This isn't Resident Evil 4. But it could still be intimidating enough the first time you enter by thinking that you could easily get lost. It gives a nice satisfaction of overcoming your first obstacle at the end to make you want to keep playing. As far as the other people in the forest, someone tells you that they came there with some friends. They're out for Pokemon fights. Oh, nice. Well, you have done a Pokemon battle with Professor Oak's grandson, maybe even 2, so that's not a new thing. There are also a couple signposts around to give you some more basic gameplay tutorial advice. Nothing that really has anything to do with Viridian Forest specifically, other than maybe yet another reminder that antidotes cure poison and that you can get them at the Pokemon Marts. You can pick up a Pokeball and an antidote that are lying on the ground too. There are also 2 hidden potions and another antidote if you happen to find them. But then that pretty much brings me to the wild Pokemon here. There is one sign that says, if you want to avoid battles, stay away from grassy areas, but you probably figured that out from routes 1, 2, or 22 already. But there are a total of 5 Pokemon you can find here, and yes, it does slightly differ depending on your version. But 2 of them aren't new if you happen to encounter them on Route 2, the aforementioned Caterpillar Pokemon. With a pretty high 45% rate in the red version and a low 5% rate in blue, you will encounter Weedle with its Poison Sting. Weedle is the bug poison type hairy bug Pokemon that is often found in forests eating leaves. It has a sharp venomous stinger on its head. The only places in the game you can find Weedle are Route 2 and Viridian Forest that you already know of, but also Route 25 a bit down the road and Route 24 in the red version only. Weedle is, of course, quite weak, but that's probably to be expected being a small caterpillar and all. Its best stat is speed, and even that is just okay. It has the single lowest base stat total of all poison-type Pokemon, and is tied for the worst defense of them. But Weedle alone can only ever know 2 moves, Poison Sting and String Shot. String Shot only lowers the opposing Pokemon's speed, so that doesn't really help too much. But Poison Sting you were already warned about. A 15 power poison move that has a 20% chance of causing poison, unless it's against an actual poison type Pokemon. If you took Bulbasaur at the start, for example, it cannot be poisoned. And I always kinda liked Weedle for what it is. I personally prefer its design to Caterpie, which I'll get into shortly, but it's nothing extraordinary or anything. Another thing that Weedle and or Caterpie do here is potentially teach you about Pokemon evolutions. I mean, it's possible that you've leveled up your starting Pokemon to level 16, or a Pidgey to 18, or Rattata to 20, or whatever. But with how little experience you get from wild Pokemon here, it would take some time. But if you catch a Weedle here in a varying level range of 3 to 5, it does evolve at a very low level of 7 into Kakuna. So if you are playing the red version, this could very likely be your introduction to evolutions. And even beyond that, it evolves again only a few levels later at 10 to its final form, Beedrill. But even if you don't catch a Weedle and evolve it, you can also find wild Kakuna here, 40% of the time in red, 5% of the time in blue. Almost the exact same rate as Weedle. Kakuna is the bug poison type cocoon Pokemon. Almost incapable of moving, this Pokemon can only harden its shell to protect itself from predators. Kakuna is not found on Route 2, but it's in the same other places as Weedle. Statistically, it's a little strange. It has better base stats of HP, defense, and special than Weedle, but worse base stats of attack and speed. Logically, that makes sense since it's just a cocoon with eyes that is almost incapable of moving, but it's an interesting case where its unevolved form is better at 2 stats, at least from a base stat standpoint. But it is also here where another game lesson is subtly taught. You can certainly catch a Kakuna here, and at first glance, it seems like there would be no reason to even bother with Weedle instead. Kakuna is the evolved form of Weedle, so why would you use a Weedle when you can almost certainly catch the stronger evolved form? Well, Wild Kakuna infamously only knows one move, Harden. Harden raises Kakuna's defense, and that's it. Wild Kakuna here can never deal damage, only raise their own defense. So if you're a new player, you will probably ask yourself, how is it even possible to win any battles or gain experience with Kakuna then? If you did choose to catch and evolve your own Weedle though, it retains the moves of Poison Sting and String Shot, and this is the only way Kakuna is able to deal damage. The only other ways to gain experience with them otherwise is to either A, use Harden 30 times without going to a Pokemon Center to use up all of its PP, or power points, in which it will use a hidden move called Struggle, a 50 power normal move that also deals half of the damage dealt back to Kakuna that any Pokemon can use if it runs out of moves. Or B, you start a battle with Kakuna out and retrade it for another Pokemon to then split experience with Kakuna. All of this isn't really said to you in the game, it's learned from experience here, and I kinda love that. You have a weak caterpillar that enters its cocoon state when it evolves, a form that is, in many cases, even weaker. You can catch a Weedle to use, you can catch a Kakuna to use, or you can avoid them entirely. It's all up to you, but you can learn some things here if you choose to use them. They're almost like tutorial Pokemon that are implemented into the main game if you want. Because, as we all know, bugs in cocoons usually turn into something even better, and it's no different here. At level 10, Kakuna evolves into Beedrill, and while Beedrill is nowhere near a powerhouse Pokemon or anything, it is significantly better than Weedle or Kakuna, so you get rewarded with a pretty decent early game Pokemon here if you exercise a little bit of patience. Me personally, I love Beedrill. It's one of my favorite Gen 1 Pokemon actually. You cannot find Beedrill here, or actually anywhere in the wild in red or blue, so getting one through evolution is a surprise if you didn't know of its existence and wanted to see what Kakuna eventually turns into. I think it's nicely done here. But if you think back to what that kindly town person said, they mentioned the other caterpillar Pokemon, and this one doesn't have any poison. 45% of the time in the blue version and 5% in red, you will encounter Caterpie, the pure bug-type worm Pokemon. Its short feet are tipped with suction pads that enable it to tirelessly climb slopes and walls. And yeah, obviously Caterpie is extremely similar to Weedle. They are indeed seen as a pair with a lot of similarities, but in many ways, Caterpie is even worse than Weedle. They have the same base stat total, but Caterpie has slightly higher HP and defense and less attack and speed. They both know String Shot, they both evolve into a Cocoon at level 7, and then a final form at 10. They're found in the same places in red and blue, but as that person said, Caterpie is not poison type. Instead of Poison Sting, the only other move Caterpie can know is Tackle, which you're probably already pretty familiar with. Tackle is stronger than Poison Sting, actually more than double its power, but that's all it does. It's a normal type move that deals small damage and can even miss 5% of the time. Poison Sting has the chance at poisoning, but then you also have to factor in Pokemon that are weak to poison or resist it. They tried to do some pros and cons to Weedle versus Caterpie. I don't personally like Caterpie more, but I think it's probably more recognizable than Weedle. Ash catches a Caterpie in the anime, which I'll get into later in the video. But yes, Caterpie evolves into its own cocoon form at level 7, also an encounter here in the forest. Metapod is the pure bug-type cocoon Pokemon. This Pokemon is vulnerable to attack while its shell is soft, exposing its weak and tender body. And really, there isn't a whole lot more to say about Metapod here that I didn't say about Kakuna. They learn the exact same Harden move, but if you evolved your own Caterpie, it will know Tackle and String Shot as well. And just like with Caterpie versus Weedle, Metapod is pure bug type, so you factor in the same bug versus bug poison weakness and resistance chart. Statistically, Metapod has more HP and defense than Kakuna, but less attack and speed. But instead of it turning into a terrifying giant bee with spikes for arms, it turns into a happier looking Butterfree at level 10 and gains the flying typing. And also like with Beedrill, Butterfree are not found in the wild in red or blue, so obtaining a Butterfree really is the blue equivalent of the red version's Beedrill discovery, just by factoring in the higher encounter rates. So if you're doing the math, the caterpillars are found 45 and 5%, and the cocoons 40 and 5%. That adds up to 95%. So what else is here? Well, at a tiny 5% rate, you will encounter the rare find of the mascot of the entire company. One of the most recognizable video game characters of all time, Pikachu, the electric-type mouse Pokemon. That's right, if you know anything at all about Pokemon, even the smallest knowledge possible, it is likely the existence of a Pikachu. It even flies through New York every Thanksgiving, and you first find them right here in Viridian Forest. When several of these Pokemon gather, their electricity could build and cause lightning storms. I did already talk about Pikachu in my power plant video because the only places you can find them in the wild in red and blue are here and the completely optional power plant. I did find that to be kinda funny because Pikachu is the Pokemon, yet you could go through the entirety of red and blue never finding one to catch, and this could happen very easily. If you didn't know they were in Viridian Forest, it's probably more likely that you'll never see one than actually seeing one, especially if you avoid the grass as much as possible. And then if you don't know about the power plant, then that's it, you won't be finding one. Sure, you can check the Pokédex to show you where they are if you see one from a trainer, but maybe you don't think to do that either. Supposedly, Game Freak originally intended for either Poliwhirl or Clefairy to be the mascot of the company and not Pikachu, and I personally find that quite fascinating. You could just as easily go through these games never finding a wild version of those too, so it's almost like when these games were designed, they wanted whichever Pokemon that would become the face of the company to be kind of a rare surprise. Poliwhirl is only found in 2 areas of the game with a Super Rod only, unless you evolve a Poliwag, and Clefairy is only a rare find in Mount Moon or purchased at the Celadon Game Corner. But the same can be said about Pikachu here, and you probably wouldn't necessarily think Viridian Forest would be the place to find them. 95% of the time you will only ever find bug-type caterpillars or cocoons here, and that's it. Then all of a sudden you could come across this electric-type bright yellow mouse. You may not have even known electric was a type yet. It's a forest, so you think you would probably find either of the small birds that you've been encountering, right? Nope, instead you can find an electrified mouse that can cause literal lightning storms if enough of them gather. It truly is a surprise if you didn't know they were found here. Because while it's pretty awesome to be able to find an electric type this early on, Pikachu is a bit on the weaker side. It has excellent speed, but that's really about it. It has very low HP and defense, but decent attack and special. It will likely outspeed every early game Pokemon, and it knows Thunder Shock right from the go, a 40 power move that can cause paralysis. So I mean, it definitely could be worth finding one. That is, until you discover that it's basically useless at the Pewter City Gym. Pikachu evolves into Raichu when exposed to a Thunderstone, and was given a baby form of Pichu in Gen 2. And yeah, that's it for wild finds here. 4 bugs and a zappy mouse. Pretty simple. And like I said, no Pidgey or Spearow? Come on, it's a forest. But Viridian Forest is also the place that teaches one of the most important game mechanics, trainer battles. I mentioned how you did fight Oak's grandson 1 or 2 times thus far, but you will face your very first trainer battle here right in the woods. It's here where you learn that if you enter a trainer's line of sight, you must enter a battle with them and see it to its completion. You cannot escape or catch theirs. The Pokemon battle occurs until one trainer is completely out of non-fainted Pokemon. And if you are the one who loses, you will have to fight them again until you win if you enter their line of sight again. The loser also pays out money to the winner, so it's quite literally gambling here. Viridian Forest has a total of 3 trainers here, 2 optional and 1 that you have to beat in order to progress, and they are all the exact same looking bug catchers with the same bugs you've been seeing in the wild. One has a level 6 Caterpie and a level 6 Weedle, One has 2 level 7 Weedle and a 7 Kakuna, and the final one has a single level 9 Weedle. It doesn't matter which version you're playing either, you will at the very least have to win against that level 9 Weedle with Poison Sting. I mean, the game did set you up for this moment with those warnings. This level 9 Weedle is the highest leveled Pokemon you will have seen at this point too, if you don't have anything higher yourself. So in a way, it's sorta like the very first mini-boss at the end of the dungeon before the actual boss at Pewter City. Is it hard to beat? No, but you could still face some issues with poisoning, especially if you aren't healed up from the rest of the forest. But once you beat that, it's the end. You exit the forest at the other side of Route 2 and can then enter Pewter City to continue on with your journey. And yeah, I really like Viridian Forest. In essence, it's like a tutorial dungeon level while still giving you the feeling of exploration where you can catch some bugs and just maybe get the surprise encounter of a Pikachu. You're still learning the game at this point, and finding other bug catchers there kinda gives the feeling like they're learning the game too. They don't know what they're doing yet, they just caught a couple bugs and wanna fight them with you. I remember my first time ever playing Pokemon was in the blue version. I took Bulbasaur for sure, and I either caught a Caterpie or a Metapod, I can't remember, but I did level it up to a Butterfree. I thought Butterfree was so good because it not only learns Confusion at level 12, a brand new Psychic type move so early on, but then it learns Poison Powder and Stun Spore and Sleep Powder shortly after, giving you the option of causing virtually any status condition that you want. My friend Shane, who was the one who let me borrow his blue version to play, soon told me that I probably won't end up using Butterfree later on because there will be much stronger options. But at the time, I was all in on the surprise of finally seeing what Metapod turns into. A beautiful, strong butterfly to cause some early game chaos, just because I took a chance on that little green caterpillar. I have some very fond memories of that, and it was all from trekking through Viridian Forest for the first time. But oh, you know what's next. We gotta talk about the changes in the yellow version. The yellow version was the first Pokemon game I ever owned myself, and oh, they certainly made some changes here. The yellow version is, of course, meant to be more of a representation of the anime, and as we all know, Ash starts his journey with a Pikachu. But since that would cheapen the Pikachu that you start your game with, Pikachu are no longer the surprise rare encounter here in Viridian Forest. In fact, they are nowhere to be found in the yellow version aside from your starter. And this Pikachu will refuse to evolve as well. And that's not even the only omission here in yellow. Weedle and Kakuna are not found anywhere in the wild in the yellow version. Well, that is certainly a ballsy move there. Weedle and Caterpie are like a bonded pair and they're going to take away one of them here. Instead, your encounters here are Caterpie 55% of the time, Metapod at 20%, and then 2 new ones to the forest. 24% of the time you will now find Pidgey, the normal flying type tiny bird Pokemon that, is really all over the place. You've very likely already been finding them on routes 1 and 2, but I did say that it was weird that you couldn't find them in a forest, so this absolutely makes sense to add them here. Spearow didn't make the cut though. Pidgey is very docile. If attacked, it will often kick up sand to protect itself rather than fight back. Pidgey is actually decently fast though, with speed being its best stat, but everything else is pretty below average. I think it's a pretty okay design too. It's a bird. It looks a lot like a real-life house sparrow, but it works for an early game bird. Pidgey evolves into Pidgeotto at level 18, and finally Pidgeot at 36. And yeah, adding up Caterpie, Metapod, and Pidgey's encounter rates equals 99%, and there are no longer Pikachu here as the rare encounter. So what is found here with that tiny 1%? Well, Pidgey's evolved form of Pidgeotto actually, which is pretty cool. This Pidgeotto will only ever be level 9 if you find one, 9 levels lower than when Pidgey actually evolves. Pidgeotto is the normal flying type bird Pokemon. This Pokemon is full of vitality. It constantly flies around its large territory in search of prey. Oh, you mean like the poor Caterpie that are all over the place here? If Pidgeotto constantly flies around in search of prey, I bet a lot of Caterpie lives are lost here. Such are the ways of the forest, I guess. But Pidgeotto are actually found in many places in yellow, so this isn't your only chance to get a wild one or anything. 12 other routes in the game actually. Pidgeotto is quite a bit better than Pidgey though, with basically every stat dialed up, which makes sense. It's a bit more even across the board though, but speed is still its strongest. And yeah, it still evolves one more time into Pidgeot at 36, so there's a ways to go if you do find a level 9 Pidgeotto here. So while it sucks that they took away Weedle, Kakuna, and Pikachu here, these changes do mostly make sense. Ash starts the show with his Pikachu, and he catches a Caterpie and Pidgeotto, which I will also talk about here soon. I am all for adding Pidgey and Pidgeotto here, but I feel like taking away Weedle and Kakuna is a little weird. But they simply aren't found in the yellow version at all, so it's all part of the game decision that they made for yellow. Things are also different with trainers here too. There are now 4 bug catchers as opposed to 3, each only owning different groupings of Caterpie and Metapod, with the final necessary battle now having a level 10 Caterpie. There's also a lass that you can fight who has a male and female Nidoran, so that's interesting. No Weedle or Kakuna found among the trainers even. As for Fire Red and Leaf Green, the Pokemon are back to the red and blue variety, but Weedle and Caterpie are now evenly found in each version. They both get a 40% rate, but then Kakuna is slightly higher in Fire Red and Metapod is more found in Leaf Green, at 10% and 5%. It's an interesting choice there. And then Pikachu gets the exact same rate of 5%, no changes there. As far as the trainers, the 3 bug catchers you fight in Red and Blue are exactly the same here as well, now with the names of Rick, Doug, and Sammy. Sammy has that level 9 Weedle at the end. But they also added 2 more bug catchers here too. Anthony has 2 Caterpie, and Charlie hits you with 2 Metapod and a Caterpie. I feel like this change is here to even the bugs out a little more. In Red and Blue, you fought 4 Weedle, 1 Kakuna, and 1 Caterpie. Now it's 4 Weedle and 4 Caterpie, 2 Metapod, and a Kakuna. I like this change though. But that's really it for these remakes. They're very close to the original games. With Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee though, ooh boy, we got some variety here my friends. 11 different Pokemon are found here, more than double what the OG games had. There are of course Weedle, Kakuna, Caterpie, and Metapod. Weedle and Caterpie are at 25 and 24% rate depending on your version, and Kakuna and Metapod are found 10% in both versions. Caterpie gets that slight 1% edge in Let's Go Pikachu, and Weedle does in Eevee. But then we actually get some wild exclusives here. At a very tiny 1% rate in LGP only, you will actually find Butterfree here, the bug flying type butterfly Pokemon. Its wings, covered with poisonous powder, repel water. This allows it to fly in the rain. Butterfree actually has pretty decent special attack and special defense as its best stats, with the rest mostly being pretty decently even. Attack is still pretty low. And I kinda love that it's now a rare encounter here. I think it makes sense. Metapod does evolve at level 10, so finding them here so early doesn't seem that crazy. But because Wild Butterfree are exclusive here to LGP, that of course means that LGE gets the exclusive of Beedrill, the bug poison type poison bee Pokemon. It has 3 poisonous stingers on its 4 legs and tail. They are used to jab its enemy repeatedly. Yeah, absolutely terrifying. Imagine the horror of actually encountering one of these in person. I mean, yikes. A 3-foot tall, 65-pound bee with poisonous spikes. Beedrill, Scyther, and Pinsir are some horrifying bugs, I gotta say. It's also sometimes hard to remember that Beedrill is not a flying type like Butterfree is though, even though they both have wings. Beedrill retains the exact same typing as both Weedle and Kakuna, but it's not like they could have had it be 3 types. That would be ludicrous.
Alright, who called for ludicrous?
But that's really my only gripe with Beedrill, but I mean, which type would you remove to add flying? Either way, Beedrill rocks, and I'm glad they added it here. For the other encounters, they brought back our old friend Pikachu in both versions, given the usual 5% rate. Yeah, you can even find them here in Let's Go Pikachu, so take that yellow version. They also added Pidgey here, returning from yellow at a 15% rate. But that leaves 3 more encounters, 2 of them also exclusive to one version. In LGP at a 10% rate, you can now find Oddish, the grass poison type weed Pokemon. It may be mistaken for a clump of weeds. If you try to yank it out of the ground, it shrieks horribly. So are the leaves part of Oddish, or did they just grow on it? Can there be an Oddish that just has the blue sphere with legs? Either way, I do really like Oddish. It has pretty good special attack, but quite weak in speed and HP. And I think it's really cool that you can find them here too. A little bulb thing with leaves on it in a forest. I mean, that works for me. Oddish evolves into Gloom at level 21, and then into Vileplume when exposed to a Leaf Stone. Gloom can also turn into Blossom when exposed to a Sunstone, but not in the Let's Go games. As for the LGE exclusive, we get Oddish's pairing of Bellsprout, the grass poison type flower Pokemon. Flower? Really? Bellsprout prefers hot and humid places. It ensnares tiny bugs with its vines and devours them. Bellsprout actually has pretty high attack and special attack for a first stage Pokemon, but is quite weak in defense, special defense, and speed. A little more of a glass cannon than Oddish, I guess. I never really cared for Bellsprout much, but it has grown on me. Yeah, pun, whatever. The whole line is based on a pitcher plant, and I began to appreciate these Pokemon more after seeing one of those in person. I think they're pretty cool, actually. Bellsprout evolves into Weepin' Bell at level 21, and then into Victory Bell when exposed to a Leaf Stone. I also really like Victory Bell a lot, but I do prefer Vileplume overall. So that leaves this area's rare spawn, and it's actually the Pokemon with the honor of being number 1. Bulbasaur is the grass poison type seed Pokemon. It can go for days without eating a single morsel. In the bulb on its back, it stores energy. Bulbasaur is pretty even statistically, with special attack and special defense tied for being its best. And yeah, that's because it's one of the OG starters. This is actually the only place in the entire game to find wild Bulbasaur, so I think that's a really awesome surprise here. The only other way to get one is in Cerulean City, where you are given one. And yeah, I feel like everybody loves Bulbasaur. It's one of my favorites from Gen 1, and as I said, it was my first ever Pokemon. I've shown this before, but we even have this little Bulbasaur garlic holder that I bought, and I love it. It's a beloved classic for a reason, and now they are rare spawns here in Viridian Forest. There is something about the simplicity of the 4 bugs and Pikachu from Red and Blue, but I think this is personally my favorite layout of wild Pokemon for Viridian Forest. There's a bit more variety, some rare ones, and each of them makes sense for being here. Even the trainers here have a bit more variety. There are 7 in total, each of them only having 1 Pokemon, and they're all different. 4 bug catchers and 3 last, but all of their Pokemon are incredibly weak, so there's really no challenge with them. There's no level 9 Weedle mini-boss, but instead, Sammy now has a level 3 Metapod. Oh. You'll also be fighting a Caterpie, Weedle, Kakuna, Pidgey, Rattata, and a female Nidoran. But in the post-game, it is here where you'll fight the Master Trainers for Weedle and Pikachu at levels 65 and 75 respectively. Yeah, Bugcatcher Scott spent the entirety of his young life leveling up a Weedle to 65, still knowing only Poison Sting and String Shot. He's doing his own Pokemon challenge for YouTube, I guess. There are also a lot more items to find here too, but nothing really worth going over. But now it's time to see what changed in those 3 years between Gen 1 and 2. This is always fun to do. You just never really know. So let's see what became of Viridian Forest in Gold and Silver. And wait, where is Viridian Forest? It should be right here. Here's Route 2, and to the north is where it is. There are some trees and... oh no. Don't tell me. This is Viridian Forest? It's not even a separate area. It's just Route 2+. Yeah, this is an absolute letdown. Sure, there's some similar looking maze here, but there isn't even grass to go into. What even happened here? It's like the Temu version of Viridian Forest. But the grass areas of Route 2 do have the VF Pokemon here, so fine. That's something. Caterpie, Metapod, and Butterfree in Gold, Weedle, Kakuna, and Beedrill in Silver. Pidgey, Pidgeotto, and Pikachu are also found here, and should I even be going over this? It's not technically Viridian Forest. I'm not titling this video Viridian Forest and Route 2. Well, I've almost already said them all, so let's just mention the rest. Hoot Hoot and Noctowl are here, and then Lediba and Ledian are here in Silver, Spinarak and Ariados in Gold. I don't know, this doesn't feel right. How's it portrayed in Heart Gold and Soul Silver? Well, thankfully, they wised up, and Viridian Forest is its own zone again, and it's actually a little more maze-looking than before, although it still follows a similar layout. Yet now we're talking. I love Gold and Silver and all, and first discovering that you can go back to Kanto was such an awesome surprise. But let's be honest, some of it just kinda sucks. Maybe that's the point, since change is inevitable, but at the same time, Heart Gold and Soul Silver make it a place to explore again, so they know what they did. For this variation, Caterpie, Metapod, and Butterfree are all here, exclusive to Heart Gold, and Weedle, Kakuna, and Beedrill to Soul Silver. Pidgey, Pidgeotto, and Pikachu are back in both versions, and then there's 2 more new ones. At night, with an extremely high 80% rate, you will find Hoot Hoot, the normal flying type owl Pokemon. It has a perfect sense of time. Whatever happens, it keeps rhythm by precisely tilting its head in time. And I say new only in terms of it new to Viridian Forest, but Hoot Hoot is absolutely everywhere in HGSS. Hoot Hoot is pretty okay with HP, special defense, and speed, but quite weak at the rest. And yeah, I like Hoot Hoot enough. I like the very bold black around its big red eyes, so it's a pretty cool design. And also adding an owl to a forest at night. Yeah, that works for me. Hoot Hoot evolves into Noctowl at level 20. Because the other new one is Noctowl at a 15% rate at night. Noctowl is also the normal flying type owl Pokemon. When it needs to think, it rotates its head 180 degrees to sharpen its intellectual power. I don't really know why that would do anything, but alright. Owls can turn their heads too, so let's go with it. Noctowl is also found in many places throughout the game, so it's nothing special to find one here. It's also worth pointing out that everything here are between levels 3 and 7, and this is post-game stuff. So there is absolutely no reason to come here for a Hoot Hoot or a Noctowl at this point. Noctowl is pretty strong at HP and special defense, average with the rest. And I do like Noctowl too. Owls are just really cool birds in general, so why not throw in some owl boys here? And this is another case, like with Psyduck and Golduck, that I think Noctowl could have maybe been Psychic Flying, since it naturally learns a total of 7 Psychic moves in Gen 4. It learns more Psychic moves than it does normal moves. But alas, this is not what we get. Still, a really cool Pokemon. The other main thing to mention here is that there are plenty of other Pokemon you can find here by headbutting trees. There's one that can have a swarm, and like every other area, a couple you can find with the Hoenn and Sinnoh sounds on your radio. Instead of going over every single one here, I'll just mention what is here. Headbutting trees here in either version will give you the potential to find Hoot Hoot, Noctowl, Seedot, and Shroomish. And then you can find Spinarak and Ariados in Heart Gold, and Lediba and Ledian in Soul Silver. Pretty cool to get some Johto and Hoenn ones here this way. The swarm Pokemon here is Kricketot if you happen to be notified that it's occurring, and then the Hoenn sound allows you to find Numel and Spoink. The Sinnoh sound lets you find Budew and Carnivine. So there are really a ton of options here in HGSS. 21 total Pokemon. Wow. There are also 5 bug catchers to fight here, now holding a big level range of 28 to 60. Bug catcher Stacy has a level 52, 56, and 60 Metapod. Not the life I would choose, but hey, to each their own. There are a couple notable items here too, like a Leaf Stone and the TM for Psych Up, if you're in the hunt for that for whatever reason. But there we have it. There are each version of Viridian Forest in the main games, but of course, it does appear in a couple side ones. Naturally, it's going to be an area in Pokemon Pinball, just like most of the places I've discussed. And yeah, that just means that you see an image of some trees in the middle of the table and can find Weedle, Caterpie, Pidgey, and Pikachu. Viridian Forest is also an area you can travel to in Hey You Pikachu and Pokemon Channel of all games, 2 games I covered in my Pokemon Paraspective. In Hey You Pikachu, Viridian Forest is a place you can go to interact with Pikachu, as well as doing the Caring for Caterpie mission, where Pikachu assists some Caterpie in evolving into Metapod, and finally Butterfree. In Pokemon Channel, it's a place you can take the bus to where you can interact with a variety of Pokemon depending on the time of day and current weather. 21 different Pokemon actually. It's also here where you can locate Jirachi at Camp Starlight. Viridian Forest is featured in a handful of anime episodes, even going as far back as the 2nd episode of the original series, Pokemon Emergency, but only at the very end. Ash and Misty venture into Viridian Forest while Ash finds and attempts to catch a Caterpie, leaving it on a cliffhanger. In the 3rd episode, Ash catches a Pokemon. The entirety of the episode takes place in Viridian Forest. It opens with Ash succeeding in catching the Caterpie, being his first ever caught Pokemon. But Misty hates bugs and ends up hurting Caterpie's feelings. Pikachu and Caterpie become friends as Caterpie hopes to become a Butterfree someday. The next day, Ash notices a wild Pidgeotto and first tries to catch it by just throwing a Pokeball. Misty tells him he doesn't know what he's doing and he has to battle it first, so he sends out Caterpie, much to the horror of Pikachu and Misty because birds eat bugs. Ash does retreat Caterpie, has Pikachu use Thundershock, and succeeds in catching Pidgeotto. Team Rocket shows up to steal Pikachu by sending out Ekans and Koffing. Koffing temporarily blinds Pikachu with Sludge, so Ash battles with Pidgeotto, who ends up losing to their Ekans and Koffing. With no other choice, Ash sends out Caterpie, causing Team Rocket to laugh at it. Ekans, Coughing, and eventually Meowth are defeated by Caterpie's String Shot, which likely angered a lot of fans of the games, but whatever. In a bout of victory, Caterpie evolves into Metapod as the episode ends. So yeah, the String Shot thing alone takes a bit of liberties in the anime. This show is most certainly not meant to be a one-to-one representation of the game, and there are plenty of times where it goes against the rules of the Game Boy games. String Shot only lowers speed, and that's it. Here, it completely incapacitates Ekans, Coughing, and Meowth, allowing Caterpie to use Tackle once, so I'm sure this put off those familiar with the games. But at the same time, in the context of the show, it does make sense in a cartoony way, and you get to see this underdog Caterpie be the victor. Even going by Caterpie's base set card, it only has String Shot, which does 10 damage and can paralyze. Both of these portrayals make it out to be a much better move than what it actually does in the games, which is trash. It's a fun little episode where you get to see Ash actually succeed at building a team with both Caterpie and Pidgeotto, plus having one of them evolve. Ash catching and evolving his Pokemon certainly do not happen often in the original series, and this episode has both happen. However, most of the episode is just Ash and Misty arguing with each other though, and that can get old. But I mean, they're kids. Also, this episode explains why there are Pidgeotto and more Caterpie in Viridian Forest in the yellow version. The very next episode, Challenge of the Samurai, also entirely takes place in Viridian Forest. At the start, Ash finds a Weedle and wants to catch it, but Misty runs away because of her hatred of bugs. And right there, see, why did they omit Weedle in the yellow version? There's one right there. Misty encounters a kid dressed as a samurai who claims he's looking for a trainer from Pallet Town. He also has a bug net with him, so I'm assuming he's one of those punk bug catchers from the game. Maybe Sammy? Sammy the Samurai. Anyway, Samurai interrupts Ash attempting to catch Weedle and it escapes as he challenges Ash to a battle. Samurai brings out a Pinsir and Ash sends out his Pidgeotto, who is weak from all the battling. Pinsir wins, and then we get a disturbing image of Ash imagining his Metapod getting cut in half by Pinsir. Yet you get to see a Pokemon get bisected, although it's hypothetical. Ash does send out Metapod, who uses Harden, which breaks the spikes on Pinsir's pincers. Samurai sends out his own Metapod, and we get a pretty memorable scene of two Metapods using Harden against each other on repeat. This is the most game-accurate scene in the entire show. After hours pass, they hear some incoming Beedrill, and Samurai retreats his Metapod. A swarm of Beedrill appear, and the three of them take off running, all while Ash's Metapod gets taken away by one of the Beedrill. In hiding, they encounter a hive of Kakuna who soon evolve into even more Beedrill, but Ash does see his Metapod. They hide out in Samurai's cabin as he berates Ash for leaving his Metapod behind. Ash sneaks out to save it, but Team Rocket appears. In doing their motto, it awakens all of the Beedrill. Ash dives out of the way as the Beedrill go after Team Rocket. One Beedrill does go after Ash, but Metapod jumps in the way to save him, which causes it to evolve into Butterfree. Butterfree uses Sleep Powder to put all of the Beedrill and Team Rocket to sleep, saving the day. I'm sure Ash and Butterfree will have many happy years together, definitely not causing millions of viewers to cry later on. The episode ends with Ash and Misty finally leaving Viridian Forest, as Jessie, James, and Meowth are certainly stabbed to death by Beedrill's poisonous stingers. So this is a nice pairing to the last episode and has a satisfying conclusion of Caterpie reaching its goal of becoming a Butterfree. The Samurai character is a little strange, but whatever. I'm also all for an episode that has a focus on Beedrill too, although they're just portrayed here as mindless antagonists. If you just get to know a Beedrill. But yeah, this makes Weedle and Kakuna's omission from the yellow even more perplexing. There are what, dozens and dozens of Kakuna and Beedrill in this episode, yet the anime-inspired yellow version is 75% Caterpie and Metapod. Ah well. It's still kind of a fun early series episode. There's just something charming about Ash's journey being in its infancy. The next time you see Viridian Forest is 77 episodes later in the 81st episode, Pallet Party Panic. The first half of the episode is about Team Rocket disrupting Ash's celebratory party for his accomplishments in the Pokemon League at Professor Oak's lab in Pallet Town. Professor Oak then sends Ash and company on a journey to Valencia Island to get a special Pokeball, so they head out through the forest. It's not explicitly stated that this is Viridian Forest, but come on, it's a forest right outside of Pallet Town, so I'm going to assume that it is. Ash discovers that Team Rocket is stuck in a tree with a nest of Pidgey and Pidgeotto. These birds are too scared to leave because a flock of Spearow and the leader Fearow have been tormenting them. Ash concludes that this Fearow is the evolved Spearow that he hit with a rock in the very first episode. Ash's plan is to jump up and down in the tree to knock Jessie, James, and Meowth out, causing them to be chased away by the Spearow. The Pidgey and Pidgeotto are still too scared to leave, so Ash brings out his Pidgeotto to help guide them. They are soon attacked by the Fearow, who knocks down Pidgeotto. This causes Pidgeotto to evolve into Pidgeot, who, along with Pikachu and the other Pidgeotto, bully the Fearow to fly away, successfully ruining its life once more. Way to go, Ash. First you give it a concussion when it was a baby, and then you shock it and bully it away. Ash then tells Pidgeot that it should stay behind to protect the other Pidgey and Pidgeotto, promising that he'll return for it after they get back from Valencia Island, a promise he is most certainly going to keep. So that covers Viridian Forest in the original series. It's pretty memorable, being the place that Ash first gets Caterpie and Pidgeotto. Caterpie becomes Butterfree, and then it's bookended way down the line with Pidgeotto evolving into Pidgeot. Ash promised to come back for it, and, well, technically he did. This episode first aired in 1999, and he eventually reunited with Pidgeot after his return from the Orange Islands. 24 years later in 2023. Bro. Yeah, the 147th episode of Pokemon Journeys, The Rainbow and the Pokemon Master, Ash finally decides to return to Viridian Forest. Team Rocket soon shows up to steal Pikachu, showing that nothing has really changed, as they are hit by a gust of wind. All of a sudden, Ash's Pidgeot swoops down to save Pikachu from a net. Ash discovers that all the Pidgey and Pidgeotto that Pidgeot was protecting have grown up a lot, but not in an evolving sense. After all this time, Ash invites Pidgeot to rejoin the team, who accepts in kind of an anticlimactic moment, to be honest. But also, it hasn't actually been 24 years in the show, because Ash is most certainly not 34 years old in the episode, so you can kinda give the time frame a pass here. But hey, at least he did come back for Pidgeot. Just, not intentionally. This notorious loose end was finally revisited 24 years later. The very first episode of Pokemon Generations, entitled The Adventure, the show begins with an exact replica of someone named Trainer continuing their Pokemon Red game. This Trainer is in the middle of Viridian Forest, where he encounters a wild Pikachu with his Bulbasaur. He catches it with a Pokeball, which then transitioned into the show's animation style. Trainer sends out his Pikachu to battle a Caterpie as a Zapdos flies by. The time spent in Viridian Forest is extremely short, but it's actually a really cool way to begin the show. And actually, that's it for Viridian Forest in the anime. Lastly, we have the manga, and Viridian Forest is the setting for a few chapters. For the Red, Green, and Blue arc, it debuted in the 3rd chapter, The Secret of Kangaskhan. Here, Professor Oak sends Red out to start his journey alongside his Poliwhirl and Bulbasaur, Polly and Soar. While looking for a Caterpie, Polly is attacked by Blue's Charmander, thinking it was wild. All of a sudden, a Kangaskhan shows up, and that's brand new for Viridian Forest. Although this was in like 1997, so I guess it's the games that missed out. Blue continues to try and catch Kangaskhan, but Red stops him once he finds out that Kangaskhan's baby was poisoned. He cures it with an antidote. Now that feels more like Viridian Forest, but it still angers Blue. They both leave with the aim to be the greatest Pokemon trainers of all time. A return to Viridian Forest occurred in Chapter 36, Drat That Dratini, where Red saves a young girl from being attacked by a Dratini. This girl turns out to be Yellow, who is just starting her journey. Red then helps her catch her first Pokemon, a Rattata. They are soon surrounded by a group of Golem and Weezing, and they fly away with Red's Aerodactyl toward Viridian City. Yeah, so far we've had a Kangaskhan, Dratini, Golem, and Weezing here in Viridian Forest. Even Rattata. This is a way different assortment than the other portrayals. 2 chapters later, in Long Live the Nidoqueen, Viridian Forest is briefly mentioned as the place Giovanni sends captured Pokemon to help awaken their primal instincts to be an army for Team Rocket, which explains the Golem and Weezing appearance. Chapter 43 of the Yellow arc, CC Seadra, begins in Viridian Forest, where Bill gets distracted by seeing Pika and falls into a river and is saved by someone known as the Trainer. A Seadra attacks them and is eventually caught by the Trainer. The very next chapter, Do Wrong Do Gong, deals with Lorelei appearing in Viridian Forest to capture Pika to confirm the Elite Four's victory over Red. Lorelei uses her dugong, but Bill, Pika, and the trainer escape. Viridian Forest is briefly mentioned in the Gold, Silver, and Crystal arc, Tyranitar War, where Yellow reveals that she caught an injured Pikachu in Viridian Forest named Choo Choo. The second chapter of Pokemon Pocket Monsters has Viridian Forest, appropriately named Big Battle in Viridian Forest. Red and Clefairy head to the forest to start capturing Pokemon, although they aren't getting along yet. A nearby Mewtwo, begins to mock them. Clefairy goes to attack a different weaker Pokemon instead, and Red catches that one. Clefairy uses Minimize, planning to attack Mewtwo from the inside, but is lifted away by a bird. Red continues to throw Pokeballs at Mewtwo, but since it's too healthy, they all fail. Mewtwo then kicks Clefairy off of a cliff, and Red has to take it to the Pokemon Center. And finally, the forest appears in Pokemon Zensho in the second chapter, Nibi City, or Pewter City. Here, Satoshi befriends a Pikachu who is playing with an acorn. Viridian Forest just acts as a midway point between Viridian City and Pewter City, which is exactly what it is anyway. And wow, this ended up being a lot longer than I thought it would be. I thought I would be looking for things to say, but I guess there's a lot to this little early game forest. Viridian Forest in the manga was way different than I expected and almost had nothing to do with the bugs that it's known for. But for me, I did start playing Pokemon with the blue version, and I did start watching the anime back when it was new in North America at least. So Viridian Forest is iconic for the beginning of my Pokemon fandom. It's where I caught that Caterpie that became the Butterfree that I thought would be overpowered. It's where Ash caught his first Pokemon. It's the first place in the games where you can find the franchise's mascot. It tries to teach the player how evolution works with the bugs evolving so early. It's the first dungeon-like area of the game where you fight your first regular trainers. I think it's a very important place for Pokemon, and I felt that I had to include it in this series at some point. And it all starts with that iconic music when you first enter it. To me, it signifies the real start of a journey, even if you're more likely going to breeze through it on repeated playthroughs. So where would you like me to cover next in this Tour of Kanto series? I mentioned this before, but I want to leave Victory Road and or Cerulean Cave for last, before I even think about making episodes on Johto. So are there more places I should cover first? Do let me know, and check out my Patreon if you would like to find more about some little Paraspectre swag, or get assigned a virtual card and shoutouts, or just want to help support the channel. Otherwise, thank you so much again for helping me make this little series my top series for the channel. Crazy. I'll see you all for the next place. Paraspectre will return.